Dan Ashworth leaves, and Eddie's power and influence at Newcastle United grows as a result. I want to go into this theme a little bit more deeper, how Eddie's influence is growing at Newcastle as a result of Dan Ashworth leaving and what that means for Newcastle. But before I get into it, guys, let's make sure we hit those subscribe buttons, those notification bells. Make sure we share, like, and subscribe. Now, going into this theme of Eddie's growing leadership and growth at Newcastle United, I want to take a first little step back and go over this news that has broken out everywhere, obviously through your man Luke Edwards, Craig Hope, all the Newcastle journalists, but also here I'm focusing on Mr. Ornstein. This is on The Athletic. Dan Ashworth placed on garden leave at Newcastle, Manchester United. As many of you who have been staying up late at night will know this. And the basics of it is that Dan Ashworth has been placed on garden leave after asking to depart Newcastle United. And this has been official now. It's happened, obviously, this Sunday. Dan Ashworth is no longer at Newcastle. And now the clubs, that being Newcastle United and Manchester United, are now negotiating Dan's official termination of his contract and his ability to start for Man United. The key crux of that being either Man United payout is either, we're hearing rumors of 10 million compensation, 20 million compensation in order for Dan Ashworth to officially start as a sporting director for them, or they wait until 2026 in order for him to start officially. So that's where things are in terms of the negotiating stuff. But I wanted to go a little bit deeper and understanding exactly how this impacts Eddie Howe's involvement and his leadership and his overall power and control at Newcastle. And I'm looking at, I want to go back to the press conference that he had pre-Bournemouth game. And there's a couple questions I'm going to go over that was asked of Eddie Howe on Dan Ashworth. This is the first one from minute one, where he's asked about what does it mean when a figure of Dan Ashworth significant leaves the club. And here's what Eddie said. Have a look at this. Have a listen to this.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one, because I think when you're in that role, I think you need longevity to actually see the fruits of your labor. It's sort of a long-term position.
So it's a long-term position. You haven't been here that long, Dan, and the fruits of whatever you're trying to put in place won't be seen because you just haven't been here long enough. Now, I know Eddie's not saying that as directly as I am, but you reading between the lines, that's what we're getting.
And I think the people that have done it best in the Premier League throughout time have always had a period of real stability and able to, because change takes a long time in any football club too.
He stopped himself there, but what did he say? The people that have done it best have been there over a long process of time. So does that mean that essentially saying you're not the best, Dan? You haven't been here long enough to be able to see the fruits of your labor. And I don't know, people will say, but he's going to Manchester United, big global brand. Fine, understood that. But Eddie's very clear about what he's saying, that whatever ideas Dan came with, whoever he thought he wasn't that guy.
To get those processes exactly how you want them to be. So, Dan's had a...
So that's interesting, to get those processes how you want them to be. So Dan clearly came with his own ideas. Before he came with his own ideas, obviously he looked at the landscape to see what was going on. And then he wanted to put those processes in place, but there wasn't the scope to put them in place. I wonder why. What processes were there before Dan came? Well, it was Eddie and his team. And clearly there must have been a friction between the two of them, or at least I'll say a healthy tension, where Dan probably wanted his ideas to come in a little bit sooner rather than later, and wasn't willing to hang around to see how long those ideas were going to come, when they were going to come to fruition. And essentially he left. And so Eddie's obviously is not dissing Dan. It's not we're being critical over Dan's influence or anything like that. We're speaking about Eddie's influence. Eddie's influence is a lot more clear to see. He's placed the foundation. We have to remember something, and we're going to go into this next bit when we talk about summer transfers. When Eddie came in, he came in this context. It was Unai Emery, who was the initial guy Newcastle wanted, but we didn't get for whatever reason. And they went to Eddie, and Eddie is aware of that. He wasn't the first choice, but he took the job anyway. He not only took the job anyway, he staved Newcastle off relegation. And not only did he take Newcastle off relegation, he also came up with the blueprint for their transfer window at the time that caused Newcastle to literally rifle up the league. And that form continued into the next season when we qualified for Champions League. And that's another 2-3 transfer windows, of which Eddie Howe was very much a part of. That first initial transfer, Dan Ashworth wasn't in place. I can't remember the exact time that Dan Ashworth came in, but he would have had limited involvement in the following. He had no involvement in the first transfer window when Bruno Gomes and others came in, and he had even further limited involvement when the others came in. The processes and procedures that Eddie Howe is talking about are the ones that he put in place at a time when Newcastle were on their absolute knees and had nowhere to go. We had rich owners, but we had very limited footballing brains around. And Eddie Howe provided that footballing brain together with him and his staff. Obviously, we've got Steve Nixon and others as well, but the combination of all of them is what rescued Newcastle from relegation, but also put Newcastle firmly in the Champions League. Now, talking further, there is a question, and I won't take you guys any longer, but there's a question again around there's a concern obviously from journalists around Newcastle's with Dan Ashworth's leaving. What does this mean for Newcastle's transfer business in this upcoming transfer window, which is speculated to be absolutely massive for Newcastle? Here's what Howe says about it. Let me know what you guys think.
Is to change everything and to come in with a big ego and go, right, this is what we're going to do.
Hold on one moment. Let me just rewind that a little bit. Let me just rewind that just a little bit.
It's very difficult to do, I think, when you're in a position of power like he is.
So he's talking about Dan Ashworth.
Then the natural temptation is to change everything and to come in with a big ego and go, right, this is what we're going to do. But the biggest compliment I can pay Dan is he didn't. And he let the structures that were in place exist and survive, and we're still working the same way.
He let the structures exist and survive that were still in place. It's those structures that were set in place by Eddie Howe and his team.
That we were in the first transfer window.
And I think he's been diplomatic by saying he let those structures be in place. That's my feeling about it.
And I have to pay him a huge compliment in that. And our recruitment has been very good, I think, from and I'm including the summer because I think that those transfer deals will come good for the club in the long term.
So the transfer deals that just came in, the summer transfer window that just happened, he's talking they will come good. So now Eddie's backing himself, and he revealed a little bit about what just happened in the previous transfer window that we've just had. Whether you guys have scored that transfer window highly or not, we're talking about Eddie's influence here, and it looks like he had a significant one.
Yeah, that won't be affected.
So, and now he's talking about the future transfer window that's happening. He's saying that won't be affected. So, Eddie's power and influence at Newcastle United is evident to see. It was constant and it was consistent and it's growing, and it even firms up even more with Dan Ashworth's departure, because now with whoever comes in after Dan Ashworth really has to, when the owners are putting that person in, has to come in with and be willing to work under the vision, almost guidance of Eddie Howe. Otherwise, they're going to have a repeat of whatever happened with Dan Ashworth. So that just shows you that rather than Eddie Howe working around a sporting director, whoever that's going to be, it's going to be the sporting director initially working around under Eddie, and that puts him as the number one supremo at Newcastle United. So we'll see what happens at this transfer window. It's interesting. I wanted to note the rise of Eddie Howe, and we're heading into the transfer window. Results, obviously, in the football game is permitting, with Eddie Howe as the number one at the helm. And we also just leave it also, obviously, at the moment, the main concern for Eddie is that Dan Ashworth has all this intel and information on Newcastle's transfer windows. So don't expect, or I wouldn't expect Dan Ashworth, no matter what compensation, I say no matter what, whatever compensation Man United have to come up with for Dan Ashworth to start working now for this transfer window has to be significant. Otherwise, I think Newcastle will push it to the point where and long out these negotiations way beyond this transfer summer window in order for Eddie's plans to come in fruition. So that's our take on it. That's in conclusion, Eddie's influence and leadership is growing at Newcastle United. It'll be interesting to see the new sporting director, whoever that is, come into place. And that person will likely be fitting around Eddie's plans. And it's interesting to see how the young manager who was once at Bournemouth has grown into the head supremo at Newcastle United. But let me know what you guys' thoughts are. What do you guys think about Eddie's growing leadership? What do you think about our summer transfer plans? Do you think Eddie and Dan should have worked it out a little bit more? Should have been a little bit more give from Eddie's side of things? Let me know what you guys think. Share your comments, like and subscribe. And until next time, guys, take care and God bless.